Good evening. Hello, hello. We are almost done with this book. We've got 5 articles left, and 2 of them are kind of long. So we've got 3 that are kind of a tiny bit shorter than the other ones we've read, and then 2 long ones. So I'm going to try to get through 3 tonight. We'll see how my voice holds out. But, yeah. So this first one, Article 36, is on Dostoevsky and spiritualism. And let's see, the subtitle is Did the Author of Crime and Punishment Have Personal Knowledge of Another World by John Chambers. So, by the way, if you're just tuning in for the first time, this is out of Forbidden Religion. So, anyway, jump into it. In The Brothers Karamazov, the masterpiece of the towering 19th century Russian novelist and short story writer Fyodor Dostoevsky, Ivan Karamazov tells the story of an atheist who didn't believe in life after death and who, after he died, was sentenced by God to walk 1 billion miles in penance. Colin Wilson summarizes this story in The Occult. It's a book I do have, by the way. Quote, the atheist lay on the road and refused to move for 1 million years. However, he eventually dragged himself to his feet and unwillingly walked the 1 billion miles. And then he was finally admitted to heaven. He immediately declared that it would have been worth walking 10 times as far just for 5 minutes of heaven. End quote. Dostoevsky himself experienced visions of heaven that were almost as ecstatic. They came to him in the form of ecstatic auras, sudden discharges of electrochemical energy that signal the start of an epileptic seizure. One such ecstatic aura, Dostoevsky had hundreds, I don't know why I can't say that tonight, had hundreds of them in his lifetime, came to him the night between Easter Sunday and Easter Monday. He described it in his secret diary as follows, quote, I felt that heaven had come down to earth and absorbed me. I really perceived God and was imbued with him. Yes, God exists. I cried, and I can recall no more. I do not know whether that blessedness lasts seconds, hours, or minutes, yet, take my word, I would not exchange it for all the joys which life can give. End quote. More than 100 years earlier, on April 5th and 6th, 1743, strangely enough, also an Easter weekend, another world-famous writer and one of an even more spectacularly mystical bent than Dostoevsky confided to his secret diary a description of the ecstatic aura he had just experienced. This was Emanuel Swedenborg, 1688 to 1772, the Swedish seer, psychic, and scientist who claimed there was direct mystical communication between our world and the spiritual realm, and who affirmed Christ as the true God. Medical researchers Elizabeth Foote Smith and Timothy J. Smith write, quote, fortunately, Swedenborg kept a record of his dreams, which was not intended for publication. During the critical years from 1743 to 1744, and for 20 years, he kept his spiritual diary, consisting of 5 volumes, based on his own testimony. Swedenborg had multiple symptoms of temporal lobe epilepsy, including a characteristic aura, falling, loss of consciousness, convulsions, visual and auditory hallucinations, and trance states. Swedenborg described his pre-epileptic seizure somewhat as Dostoevsky described his, quote, had also in my mind and my body a kind of consciousness of an indescribable bliss, so that if it had been in the higher degree, the body would have been, as it were, dissolved in mere bliss. This was the night between Easter Sunday and Easter Monday, also the whole of Easter Monday, end quote. Swedenborg's visions of heaven, dictated to him by the angels and gathered in the course of numerous astral voyages, fill numerous volumes, and were taken with the utmost seriousness during the 19th century by Blake, Emerson, Coleridge, Carlyle, Henry James Sr., Tennyson, the Brownings, Oliver Wendell Holmes, Thoreau, Goethe, and many others. All right, there's a picture here. I'm going to go ahead and show it. In fact, I'm going to show both of them just to get it done. The first picture is the Russian author Fyodor Dostoevsky, whose intense spiritual experiences informed his work. That'll be this one. There we go. And then the other one is the 18th century Swedish scientist, philosopher, and spiritual explorer Emanuel Swedenborg had visions not unlike Dostoevsky's. So that is Swedenborg. I'm pretty sure I have a bunch of his stuff too, so I'll look if I remember at the end of this. Which reminds me, I have a poll out for the next 4 possible books, or 4 choices for the next book, is what I should say. It's up on Twitter, and it'll be there for the next 6 days, I think. Could Swedenborg's admittedly unorthodox descriptions of a higher reality really have been merely the product of maverick and uncontrolled electrochemical charges rampaging through his brain? According to the literature, ecstatic auras are characterized by intense elation and ineffable, all-pervading bliss, a feeling that the secrets of the universe are about to be revealed. Or, if Swedenborg's visions were really visions, or only in part electrochemical, does that then mean that the epileptic fits of Fyodor Dostoevsky also provided the Russian writer with a gateway through which he could glimpse, like Blake, quote-unquote, an immense world of delight closed by your senses 5? And do Dostoevsky's swift but ecstatic visions of other realms peek out here and there in his novels and short stories? But first of all, just who was Fyodor Dostoevsky? He was a man whose life was almost terrifying in its steady progression of shattering events and unheard of personal woes. All of these made him stronger. They also drove him daily to distraction. Dostoevsky's father was an impoverished doctor in a Moscow charity hospital who tyrannized his little family. When Fyodor was 15, his father was murdered by 3 of his serfs in circumstances that still remain obscure. Dostoevsky hated his father and felt vaguely responsible for his death. The theme of patricide runs through much of his writing. Far worse awaited. He attended military engineering school, which he hated, graduated, fulfilled his duties, then threw himself into his great love, literature. He scored an early success with his first novel, Poor Folk, but he became attracted to radical politics and frequented a secret society promoting the socialism of Saint Simon and Fourier. In 1848, he was arrested with friends and found guilty of disseminating anti-government literature. His sentence was severe, 8 years at hard labor in Siberia, later commuted to 4 by the Tsar. But in the words of Vladimir Nabokov, quote, a monstrously cruel procedure was followed before the actual sentence was read to the condemned men, end quote. Dostoevsky and his friends were sentenced to death and brought to the place of execution before a firing squad. They were tied to the posts. Dostoevsky and his companions thought they had only minutes left to live. Then an official stepped forward and commuted the sentences to penal servitude. Nabokov writes that after this horrendous experience of sham execution, quote, one of the men went mad. A deep scar was left in Dostoevsky's soul by the experience of that day, end quote. Dostoevsky spent the next 4 years as a convict at hard labor in Siberia. In 1854, he was forced to serve in the army in Semipalatinsk, an Asiatic hellhole. In 1858, he married and returned to St. Petersburg, beginning a life of incessant activity as a novelist, journalist, and editor. His first wife died, and he married his stenographer. In the 60s and 70s, he published his great novels, The Humiliated and Wronged, 1861, Notes from the Underground, 1864, Crime and Punishment, 1866, The Idiot, 1868, The Possessed, 1871, A Raw Youth, or The Adolescent, 1875, The Diary of a Writer, 1876 through 80, and The Brothers Karamazov, 1880. He had fame now, but not much fortune. Imprisonment had broken his health. Ever afterward he was subject to epileptic seizures. He was addicted to gambling, periodically losing every cent he owned. The great writer fought with everyone. Quote, over and above all this, writes Mark Slonim, were his ecstatic flights, his carnal temptations, and the rambling of his tormented soul in search of God, harmony, and truth, end quote. He died at age 60. Given such a life, it is hardly surprising that Dostoevsky's novels are populated with tormented, desperate, driven, and divided souls. Still, the light of the spirit, for good and for ill, flickers spasmodically in these tattered people. They know they have free will, and they cannot bear the knowledge. George Steiner writes, quote, they stand at the outermost limits of freedom. They stand at the outermost limits of freedom. Their next step must lead either to God or to the pit of hell, end quote. The natures of Dostoevsky's protagonists are torn. It is as if their souls are partially atomized, as if they live in an incessant, mild, epileptic state that leaves them at every moment open to God and to the devil. Steiner writes that, and this is a long quote, Dostoevsky's multiple vision of the soul allowed for the likelihood of occasional fragmentation. Ghosts could be manifestations of the human spirit when the spirit acts as pure energy, divorcing itself from the coherence of reason or faith in order to sharpen the dialogue between different facets of consciousness. What counts is the intensity of the quality of the experience, the shaping impact of the apparition upon our understanding. Dostoevsky surrounded his personages with a zone of occult energies. Forces are attracted toward them and grow luminous in their vicinity, and corresponding energies erupt from within and take palpable form. Correspondingly, he drew no firm barrier between the world of ordinary sense perception and other potential worlds, end quote. Steiner quotes Merezkovsky, that's my best guess, quote, to Dostoevsky, the plurality of the worlds was a manifest truth, end quote. I guess that's a quote of a quote. For all that, Dostoevsky did not believe in spiritualism. For him, spiritualism was a form of isolation that trivialized religion through mysticism, when what was needed was more faith in true orthodoxy. Perhaps channeled spirits existed, but proof of their existence proved only that the spirits existed. It did not prove that God existed. The spirits were, finally, trivial and irrelevant. In 1875, the great Russian chemist D.L. Mendeleev, 1834 to 1907, best known as the formulator of the periodic system of chemical elements, set up a commission in St. Petersburg to investigate the claims of spiritualism. Dostoevsky waged war against spiritualism in his newspaper columns, while also waging war against Mendeleev's methods, which he found high-handed and manipulative. The commission's final report roundly rejected spiritualism as anything but a conscious or unconscious fraud, effectively squashing its popularity for decades. Still, Dostoevsky was fascinated by the imagery of spiritualism. Was he fascinated by more than that? And that imagery sometimes peeps through in his works. Professor Ilya Vinitsky of the University of Pennsylvania has found strong evidence of Swedenborg's influence in Dostoevsky's 1873 short story Bobak. The anti-hero of Bobak is an alcoholic literary man named Ivan Ivanovich, who attends the funeral of a distant relative and then, as Professor Vinitsky writes, quote, remains in the cemetery where he unexpectedly overhears the cynical, frivolous conversations of the dead. He discovers from these exchanges that human consciousness goes on for some time after the death of the physical body, lasting until total decomposition. End quote. The deceased persons end up communicating only with the single unpleasant gurgling onomatopoetic word Bobak. Onomatopoetic word. Not familiar with that term. I will look it up. Then says Dr. Vinitsky, quote, the dead, realizing their complete freedom from earthly conditions, decide to entertain themselves by telling tales of their existence on the top floor, that is, during their lives. But Ivan Ivanovich suddenly sneezes and the dead fall silent. More, as the narrator suggests, from their reluctance to share such an important secret with a living man than from embarrassment or fear of police. End quote. Professor Vinitsky believes this short story is a semi-satirical representation of the afterlife as described by Emanuel Swedenborg in his On Heaven, the World of Spirits, and On Hell as They Were Seen and Heard by Swedenborg, 1758. Swedenborg asserts that, quote, after death the human soul goes through several stages of purification of its internal content, good or evil, and as a result finds its deserved eternal reward, paradise or hell, end quote. The first two states of man after death take place in the grave and last, quote, for some several days, for others months or even an entire year, end quote. In the second state, man's exterior disappears, putrefaction sets in, and the spirits of the dead become, quote, visibly just what they had been in themselves while in the world, what they then did and said secretly being now made manifest, for they are now restrained by no outward considerations, and therefore what they have said and done secretly they now say and endeavor to do openly, having no longer any fear of loss of reputation such as they had when they were alive. End quote. There is evidence in Dostoevsky's other works, both great and small, of the influence of Swedenborg. In the short story The Dream of a Ridiculous Man, the much belittled narrator astral travels to another world that is actually an alternative and Edenic Earth. Swedenborgianism also influenced Dostoevsky's vision of evil in Crime and Punishment. According to the Nobel Prize-winning poet Czeslaw Milosz Svidrigailov's dreadful image of an eternity in a bathhouse infested with spiders resembles some visions of hell described by Swedenborg. The influence of Swedenborg is seen most powerfully, however, when it is playing over the contorted visionary faces of so many of Dostoevsky's characters. In the wonderful depiction of Father Zosima in The Brothers Karamazov, for instance, the discourses of Zosima contain clear Swedenborgian teachings about the spiritual world, particularly that hell is always a voluntary spiritual state. But in creating the character of Zosima, Dostoevsky does far more than find a spokesman for Swedenborg. In all his works, Dostoevsky's abiding and tormenting concern is whether God exists. In his portrayal of Zosima, the utterly good man and the beloved mentor of the one good Karamazov brother, the priest Alyosha, he seems to be telling us that his answer is yes. And that is the end of that article. So, we'll jump into the next one. Article 37. 6 pages, and with one small picture. So this one is Victor Hugo and the Spirits. Did the author of Les Miserables and The Hunchback of Notre Dame draw inspiration from different dimensions? By John Chambers, same person that wrote the last one about Dostoevsky. A glut of books on the market today present supposedly spirit-channeled guidance on everything from ancient mysteries to contemporary social behavior. The goal, ostensibly, is to warn us that if our species continues its self-centered, destructive march and does not make a determined effort to shift upward to a more spiritual level, then we cannot hope to survive. The non-material light beings who deliver these messages usually say they are here to help us make the leap. For anyone who delves intellectually into Earth's mysteries, this can be pretty hard to swallow. Not only are the assertions of the channeled sources impossible to prove, but it's difficult not to impute to them a hugely subjective quality as well, particularly when even the best contradict each other. For example, the guides of the Pulitzer Prize-winning poet James Merrill and those of Ken Carey claim that ours is the only planet in our entire galaxy to be inhabited by intelligent physical beings. However, the disembodied beings who speak through popular channels like Barbara Marciniak and Patricia Pereira insist that the galaxy swarms with billions of intelligent life forms, and that though the majority of these are non-physical, that leaves several billion who are physical. However, moreover, the spirits, who should know better, often play fast and loose with physical sciences such as astronomy. Many, for example, represent themselves as coming from an entire constellation, but when we consider that a constellation is an arbitrary grouping of stars, which, though being of equal apparent brightness, may be thousands of light years apart, this assertion seems like arrant nonsense. Nevertheless, what some would accept as corroboration of the reality and mission of such disembodied spirits has recently emerged from an unexpected quarter. No less respected figure than the author of the world-famous novels Les Miserables, made into the hit Broadway musical Les Mis, and The Hunchback of Notre Dame, made into a full-length Disney animated feature. From 1853 to 1855, a great French writer, Victor Hugo, while in political exile on Jersey Island in the English Channel, participated with family and friends in numerous spiritistic seances, during which at least 115 different quote-unquote discarnate entities held forth on a vast variety of topics. The communications from the spirit world transmitted by a table leg that tapped out letters, the precursor of the Ouija board, allegedly came from deceased historical and literary personages, including Galileo, Shakespeare, Hannibal, Christ, Muhammad, and Mozart. Mythical beasts such as Balaam's ass, the lion of Androcles, and the dove of the ark. Abstractions like idea, drama, India, and Russia. Creatures of the spirit world who said they had never taken life, including the shadow of the sepulchre, death, and archangel love. Extraterrestrials from the planets Mercury and Jupiter, and the occasional Jersey Island ghost, including the woman in white, the headless man, and the grim gatekeeper. This wasn't an isolated experience. Beginning in 1853, a wave of interest in channeling had swept across France. It held the upper classes in such thrall that the Bishop of Paris, France's highest-ranking cleric, warned from the pulpit that eternal damnation awaited those who consorted with the spirit world. Hugo might not have become interested at all had not a close friend, the playwright Delphine de Girardin, arrived from the mainland on a visit and talked the Hugo family into trying to do the tables. Before I go on, there's a picture here. It's the only one in this article. Victor Hugo, the most influential romantic writer of the 19th century and France's greatest poet. So there is Victor Hugo. Okay. After 2 or 3 attempts, who had drowned 10 years before, along with her husband, the girl was 19 years old and pregnant when she died. Hugo's attention was caught and would not let go for another 2 years. Finally, in October 1855, upon the failure of every one of the spirit's predictions to come true, and an episode of madness during which participant Jules Alex threatened to shoot everybody at the seance and then went into a catatonic trance, the seances came to a halt. Hugo was certain the spirit world existed, but equally certain we could never know much about it. He was never tepid about the numerous seances he was now to attend, but at times he was more enthusiastic than at others. In December, Hugo predicted the seance transcripts would become, quote-unquote, one of the Bibles of the future. But in his lifetime, he said little about these experiences, fearing derision and negative effects on his political and literary work. The transcripts, of which about 2/5 are lost, weren't published until 1923, and then only partially. In 1968, a more expanded collection was published in Volume 9 of editor Jean Mason's monumental 18-volume Oeuvres Complètes de Victor Hugo. I don't know what those words mean. Something, I don't know what the first word is, but I guess the complete works of Victor Hugo. Anyway, sorry. It's easy to be skeptical about these seances. Most scholars believe their contents came entirely, if unconsciously, from the mind of Victor Hugo, a man of huge genius, or from the minds of one or another, or all of the other, usually talented and often well-educated participants at the seances. This being said, it's difficult not to marvel at the originality and imaginative richness of all of the ostensibly spirit-born messages, the contents of which apparently came as a surprise to the participants. Here is a cross-section. The attendees had veritable, quote-unquote, close encounters of the third kind, communicating with an alien named Thyatafia, who was from the planet Jupiter, as well as with the inhabitants of the planet Mercury. The Mercurians were or Mercurians, were half physical and half spirit and floated like living beams of light in the atmosphere of their planet. The participants watched as the talking tables not only tapped out messages but also drew pictures with a pencil attached to the table leg, notably of the inhabitants of Mercury, but also based on mental images of loved ones that the participants projected onto the table. The spirit draftsman of the channeled Mercurian pictures claimed to be the 15th century alchemist Nicolas Flamel, and strangely enough, the drawings contained ancient alchemical formulae that help describe the Mercurians. French poet André Chenier, guillotined in 1794 during the bloodiest part of the French Revolution, appeared and dictated the final verses of the poem he had been working on the day he was executed. The verses, exactly matching the style of the living Chenier, were channeled when Victor Hugo was not at the seance, somewhat disconcerting critics who insist that the contents of the Jersey Island seances came solely from the unconscious mind of the great French poet. Chenier also described his beheading and what came afterward. The table composed music, its leg tapping on a piano keyboard. One of the spirit composers was supposedly the spirit of the ocean, another was Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. A number of spirits claimed to be the shades of beasts who, in myth and legend, have helped mankind. The lion of Androcles, who spared the life of Androcles in the Roman Forum because the Christian had earlier removed a thorn from the lion's paw. Balaam's ass, who, momentarily given human speech by God, set Moabite holy man Balaam back on the path of righteousness, and the dove of Noah's Ark, who guided the ark of the living remnants of our planet to its post-flood destination. The entities told Hugo that animals, quote, couldn't reason but could glimpse God, end quote, and they communicated to the poet a thoroughly modern animals' rights and even plants' rights agenda. They claimed that beasts, plants, and even stones all contained souls and therefore should be treated with great love and respect. Hugo wholeheartedly embraced these beliefs, returning crabs to the sea, letting his property be overrun by wild animals, and refusing to snip flowers. He would not even kick stones, which the spirits insisted were also vessels of soul matter. The turning table channeled a lion speaking the language of lions and a comet speaking the language of comets, the comet using the table leg to draw a self-portrait. The spirits preached a doctrine of reincarnation or metempsychosis, which included passing through lives as animals, plants, and stones, as well as human beings. Through one good act and successive reincarnations, we can attain angelhood. But a single truly reprehensible act can send us tumbling all the way back down the great chain of being to reincarnation as a stone. Sinful Cleopatra, the spirit guides claimed, had been reincarnated as a worm. The personification of metempsychosis also held forth, summing up the nature of metempsychosis in 14 gem-like aphorisms. Okay. Excuse me a minute here. The spirit called Death asked Hugo to write a last will and testament, authorizing the timed release of the seance transcripts decade by decade. In this way, Death explained, the spirit's words would appear to mankind posthumously in, quote, periods of human crisis when some shadow passes over progress, when clouds blot out the ideal, end quote. The critical future year when the clouds would begin to darken mankind's destiny was, the spirits said, the year 2000. The Carthaginian general Hannibal, who crossing the Alps and with elephants had come close to conquering the Roman Empire in the 3rd century BC, described in fantastical terms the imperial city of Carthage as it had been before the Romans razed it to the ground. The spirits sometimes seemed to speak with the hearts of stars as they described a universe filled with gleaming stars obliged to help weeping stars and worlds of reward on which dwelt the souls of those who had lived meritorious lives in previous incarnations. These later worlds were obliged to help punitary planets inhabited by the souls of those who had done badly in previous existences. As the participants of the seances, reeling from these messages, tried to put it all together, they begrudgingly had to conclude that our universe was a somewhat grim place. Everywhere, entities were in chains, stones, plants, prisons, serving pitiless sentences for reasons they could not know. Quote, "Your savage universe is God's convict," end quote, says the spirit persona of Hugo's 600-line poem, What the Shadow's Mouth Says. Written in 1854 and inspired by the spirits, elsewhere in the same poem, Hugo describes Earth in terms that make us think of the scum of the galaxy, bar, teeming with present, past, and future convicts from all across the universe, seen in the first Star Wars movie. Quote, "On our planet, packed with infamous prisons, there dwell the wicked of all the universe, the condemned who come from alien skies diverse, brood in your rocks, bend in your bowing trees." End quote. What to do about the bad situation most of us face in the universe? The spirits counseled taking total personal responsibility and being totally joyful. The Shadow of the Sepulchre declaimed to the seance goers on December 18th, 1854, quote, "You know what I would do if I were in your place? I'd ask for all or nothing. I'd insist on immensity. I'd work up a magnificent hunger, an enormous thirst, and I'd race through the drunken spaces between the spheres, singing the fearsome drinking song of eternity, joyous, radiant, sublime, hands full of bunches of grapes made of stars, and my face purple with suns. I wouldn't leave a star unturned, and at the end of the banquet I'd pass out beneath the table of the heavens, radiant with light." End quote. If we are to believe Hugo's spirits, many of us are already traveling the astral realms somewhat in this manner. One of the strangest of the theories set forth by the Jersey Island spirits was that of homo duplex, the double man. This term, used in Latin Christian scripture, is to describe man's duplicitous nature, was used by the Jersey spirits, referring to man's double nature, as an inhabitant of his physical body in everyday empirical reality during waking hours, and as a voyager through non-physical realms in his astral body while asleep. The point of the trips being to gather up psychic strength for the next day. The spirits describe the indescribable when they exhort our astral spirits to a nighttime voyage with the words, quote, "Get up, get on your feet. There's a high wind blowing. Dogs and foxes bark. Darkness is everywhere. Nature shudders and trembles under God's whipcord. Toads, snakes, worms, nettles, stones, grains of sand await us. Get on your feet." End quote. Where did all of this weird knowledge come from? Almost every critic replies Victor Hugo. Hugo admitted that much of the spirit's cosmology was in his head before he came to Jersey Island, but he insisted not all of it. We now know Hugo secretly studied the core Kabbalist wisdom document, the Zohar, in the 1830s. And the Zohar does echo the Spirit's pantheistic doctrine that all matter is coexistent with varying degrees of spirit, the amount of spirit determining how good or bad matter is. And when Death speaks of coursing joyously through the heavens, he sounds like the heretical Dominican monk Giardo Bruno, burned at the stake in 1600, who insisted we could attain transcendence and personal redemption only through frenzied heroic action, a sort of reaching out to be God himself in everything we do. It is Victor Hugo's absorption in occult philosophies like the Kabbalah, not to mention the poet's equally intense interest in mesmerism and Hinduism, that today makes people think he may have been, along with Leonardo da Vinci, a Grand Master of the Priory of Sion. There never was a Priory of Sion, but an even what? But even more fascinating subject of inquiry might be just where the immense learning and genius of Victor Hugo leaves off and the strangely compelling and perhaps in some way objectively real universe of the Jersey Island spirits takes over. So that was a weird sentence, or couple of sentences. That he was a Grand Master of the Priory of Sion, then it immediately says there never was a Priory of Sion. So I'm not sure that's a weird sentence. Anyway, I don't know if I can do another article tonight. I might just have to. Well, you know what? 45 minutes. Can I do another 8 pages? Maybe. I'm going to take a break first, though. That way I only have 2 articles left. Or was it 2? Yeah, there are 40 articles altogether. I would only have 2 articles left for the next session, and then we would be done with the book. Otherwise, we'll be dragging it out 2 sessions. So I am going to take a quick break, do some breathing, because I'm getting fuzzy headed from projecting breath so much. So anyway, I will be back in a few minutes. All right, I'm back. I'm gonna get through one more article here. We'll finish the book, and if you haven't gone out to Twitter, to my, you can look. I put out a poll, and the 4 books that I gave you to choose from are The 12th Planet by Zechariah Sitchin, The Problem of Slavery in Western Culture by David Bryan Davis, ISIS Unveiled by H.P. Blavatsky, and Occult Philosophy in the Elizabethan Age, which I believe is Francis Yates. So, yeah, choose from one of those. It's out there for four more days, it looks like. So, yeah, give me your vote. Let me know what you want to, which one of those 4, or you can always put in a comment and suggest something else if you'd like. I'm going to go with whatever is the gets the most votes, because I want to read all 4 of those books. So, all right, let's jump into this next one. This one, Article 38, Sound and Pictures from the Other Side, Pioneering the New Science of Instrumental Transcommunication by Bill Eigels. The issue of whether human consciousness survives beyond physical death, and if so, in what way, has intrigued our species since time immemorial. Nor has the matter been one of mere academic or theological interest. Rather, human beings have long and diligently sought to communicate with those who have made the transition from earthly life to whatever realm follows death, in order to gain, among other things, meaningful solace and psychological closure, worldly advice, and or spiritual wisdom. Indeed, so impassioned has been the ongoing drive to contact deceased loved ones and friends that history is filled with the lore of contact seeking through such means as exalted oracles, spirit mediums, journeying shaman, Ouija boards, and automatic writing. However, Western materialist science has traditionally maintained a dismissive, even cynical attitude to all notions of communicating with the dead, and for several reasons. The wholly subjective nature of such experiences, the innate susceptibility to charlatanry, imagination, and overriding personal desire, and the difficulties involved in conducting any truly scientific investigation to obtain independent verification. Science has therefore, in effect, held beyond the veil to mean beyond the ability and hence the desirability of being investigated. As far as mainstream culture is concerned, the image of seances held in darkened parlors by exotic mediums during the late 19th and early 20th centuries will serve as a visual emblem for the practice of bamboozling well-meaning but emotionally overwrought or greedy and thus gullible common folk. Nevertheless, the advent of modern-day phenomena such as telepathic channeling of discarnate sentient entities, near-death experiences, and past life and spirit releasement therapies has served to renew the debate about the post-death survival of consciousness. This is true for people who have experienced such phenomena firsthand, for conventionally trained researchers who choose to investigate the question seriously, and for those whose New Age mindset predisposes them to believe in the legitimacy of such phenomena. The rest of the population, it may be postulated, continues to await the arrival of more tangible, observable evidence for the survival hypothesis before seriously entertaining the matter. The day may have arrived. Since the mid-1980s, a small multinational network of private experimenters and researchers, now known as the International Network for Instrumental Transcommunication, INIT, has used conventional electronic equipment such as radios, televisions, telephones, and personal computers to receive and record intelligent signals in the form of voices, images, and text from self-identifying deceased individuals whose consciousness appears to persist on a non-physical plane of existence. These individuals, or transpartners, appear to be former colleagues, loved ones, and others who have made the transition from Earth to the spirit world. The INIT and leading American researcher the co-founder of INIT and leading American researcher Mark Macy of Boulder, Colorado, co-authored a book in 1995 entitled Conversations Beyond the Light. Wow. Okay. And now publishes a thrice yearly newsletter on the subject. A former technical writer and the author of anthologies on global problem solving, Macy survived a bout of colon cancer in 1988, coming through with his life intact but his belief system about God, agnostic, and death, fearful, severely challenged. Inspired as a result of his experience to learn what happens when we die, he encountered researcher and former industrialist George Meek, who showed him a personal letter from Meek's wife that was received through a computer after she died in 1991. I'm going to pause there. There is a picture here, one of three pictures. A research office at the International Network for Instrumental Transcommunication. So, lots of electronic equipment. The startling, hard evidence of life after death overwhelmed Macy and led him to explore with Meek the young field of instrumental transcommunication, ITC, an area in which Meek was already active. From Meek, Macy learned of a spiritual communication device called Spiricom, a set of tone generators that emit a buzzing sound comprising 13 tones that span the range of the adult male voice, developed in 1980 by a technical wizard named Bill O'Neill under Meek's patronage. Spiricom reputedly enabled O'Neill to conduct a dialogue with the voice of a NASA, National Aeronautics and Space Administration scientist, Dr. George Mueller, who died in 1967. O'Neill and Mueller were apparently able to use their collective minds to modulate the unstable buzzing sound of the Spiricom device into a facsimile reminiscent of the voice Mueller had used while alive. After a time, the facsimile became sufficiently clear that an intelligible dialogue between O'Neill and the spirit of Mueller could be heard through the buzzing sound, with Mueller's voice sounding robot-like but nonetheless infused with a definite living intelligence. The experience awakened Macy's spirituality, causing him to acknowledge the existence of God for the first time, as well as the immortality of the human spirit, and to view the physical world as merely the vehicle we use to navigate in the dense physical world of our period of earthly life. Realizing that physical world is only a transitory phase, he lost his fear of death and came to realize that many more exciting experiences await us, all of us, on the other side of the veil. Since that time, Macy has progressively devoted his life to experimenting with and writing and lecturing on ITC and the information that has been conveyed to him and his fellow researchers around the world by their spirit colleagues. These spirit colleagues are usually former ITC experimenters who have died but continue their work from the other side. Among the more astonishing results reported by Macy and others in the receipt of actual telephone calls from a deceased former European psychologist and ITC researcher named Dr. Konstantin Rodive, who died in 1974. In the spring of 1996, Macy dialogued with Rodive on the telephone for 15 minutes. And other researchers in Luxembourg have spoken with Rodive for longer periods of time. Such phone contacts, however, are not limited to professional researchers, but appear to be both a spontaneous and more widely reported phenomenon. For example, the renowned U.S. medical intuitive Dr. Caroline Myss, M-Y-S-S, has reported that in December 1992, she unexpectedly received a telephone call from her Native American shaman mentor, during which he asked her to write his life story for publication. Some weeks later, she discovered that her mentor had died in another city 2 days before her telephone conversation with him took place. ITC contacts are not limited to telephone calls, but more often have involved television pictures and computer images and text files. Computer contacts, for example, often occur after researchers leave home, having made sure that all of their equipment is turned off. When they return home, sometimes their computer will be running and new files, either pictures or text, will have been planted on disk. Direct communications from an identifiable entity on another plane. The first color television picture of a spirit entity was reported in October 1995 in association with such a computer contact when a German researcher awoke with a compelling urge to try an experiment with his color TV set. He was accustomed to receiving paranormal video images on his monochrome television, but only after receiving phone notification in advance from his spirit colleagues. This time, the researcher simply turned on his color set and trained his camcorder on the picture tube. In that instant, an image of Swedish ITC pioneer Fredrik Jurgensen, deceased since 1987, appeared on the screen and remained there for 24 seconds. Hearing a loud cracking noise coming from the next room, the researcher got up to investigate, but not until he had unsuccessfully attempted voice contact with the televised image on his set. Upon entering the next room, he discovered his computer running. It apparently had been switched on paranormally, and on the screen he found a typed message to him under the name Jurgensen. What does it take to establish contact and with deceased persons across the veil? Macy emphasizes that ITC contacts are not so much a result of a method of modern communications technology, but rather derived from the minds of living individuals on Earth, linking closely with the consciousness of minds on subtler, non-physical levels of existence in a positive, loving spirit of cooperation. This harmonious vibration has been coined the quote-unquote contact field and represents the pivotal mediumistic bridge that enables interdimensional communication with the spirit world to occur. According to information received during various ITC contacts, the phenomenon is strengthened by, quote, working on the inner life, the eternal center, and results from unified cooperation of people who are concerned and whose efforts are supported in ITC circles, end quote. Okay, I've got two pictures here I'll go ahead and show real quick. They're the last two in the article, and then we've got almost 4 pages to go. Well, three total. The left photo of Swedish ITC pioneer Fredrik Jurgensen. Right, video image of Jurgensen as it mysteriously appeared on the television screen of a German researcher after Jurgensen had died. So I'll just show you both of them at once. So the fuzzy one being the television picture after he died. Okay. In effect, researchers' spirit colleagues have said that ITC can work only, quote, when the vibrations of those involved are in complete harmony and when their aims and intentions are pure, end quote. Macy's personal work to date suggests that several factors have a hand in promoting successful contact with those on the other side. These include maintaining passionate desire for contact, constantly favorably holding thoughts of a deceased person with whom there was a strong emotional attachment, and making steady efforts over time to improve the living individual's mental focus and clarity through prayer, meditation, and other forms of psychic attunement. As Macy says, however, ITC has thus far been provided no user's guide or startup manual for establishing dependable receiving stations. Contact work is still very much a case of trial and error, although Macy is confident that he will be able to develop a strong contact field in the future among colleagues on both sides of the veil, and thus create a reliable receiving station in Colorado. Thus far, however, the contact field in Western Europe remains the strongest, as evidenced by the plethora of contacts received by the research teams there from a variety of sources. The question inevitably arises as to what has been learned substantively as a result of ITC contacts with the spirit world. Evidently, quite a lot. For example, the spirit colleagues of ITC experimenters report that a multidimensional structure of non-physical reality exists beyond the Earth plane, with the multiplicity of dimensions superimposed and interacting in a complexity impossible to readily convey or even comprehend in human language and three-dimensional constructs. The immediate stage following death, however, appears fairly simple to understand. When most people die, they emerge onto the third or mid-astral plane, a world of energy that shares the same space as the Earth, but where individuals are regenerated from their wounds and illnesses and are eventually able to create their desired image of themselves and their surroundings through the power of their thoughts. One German boy, Ezra Braun, who died of leukemia at the age of 12 in 1986, had a picture of himself sent to the personal computer of a European ITC researcher in 1992. The picture showed a small young man in his late teens or early 20s, his arm raised in a wave, his face easily recognizable as that of the boy, only older. His ecstatic, still earthbound parents confirmed the boy's identity, as well as many other details concerning the boy's pre-death interests and possessions that were revealed in the transmitted picture and in an accompanying written transmission. In addition to providing a clear view of what life is like on the other side of the veil and occasionally providing communications from departed loved ones and missed friends, ITC transmissions have also provided spiritual insights from higher levels of consciousness through angelic beings who have never assumed human form. Via letters sent to the researchers' computers, these beings have also provided a significant quantity of hitherto unknown information on the prehistory of the Earth, information that conventional sources have been unable to provide. Sit up here. These beings state, for example, that a planet once existed between Mars and Jupiter, known as either Maldek or Marduk. Although its inhabitants were highly advanced technologically and space travel was routine for them, their technical ability exceeded their better sense, and their planet exploded, creating the asteroid belt that exists today. Before the final detonation, however, some of the Mardukians traveled to Earth and seeded a civilization that eventually became Atlantis. When these former denizens of Marduk interbred with the primitive peoples that existed on the Earth at that time, they began the heritage of our own species approximately 20,000 years ago. Although reminiscent of the theories of researcher Zecharia Sitchin as to the origins of humanity, these revelations are distinctive in that Marduk is claimed to have been destroyed as a planet and now continues to exist only on the astral plane. The subtle world is where many people on Earth go after their demise to continue living on Earth an Earth-like existence in their astral bodies. Interestingly, people on Marduk apparently have limited vision of themselves. Like the physical Earthlings they once were, they believe that their astral planet is the full extent of reality. Many Mardukians do not acknowledge the existence of life on the physical planet Earth. On the physical Earth. I added a word there. Rather, many believe that their notions of an early existence in physical form are just bad dreams. What a disappointment to realize that spiritual myopia seems to persist, at least for some of us, even after leaving earthly life. According to Macy, those on the other side of the veil decide who among them will communicate with living ITC researchers. While there is evidence of an overall plan for the work of ITC, few details have been forthcoming thus far. Well-known personages have been known to communicate, and such as 19th century English explorer Richard Francis Burton, French author Jules Verne, and the American composer Scott Joplin. Transmissions are more likely to originate from deceased ITC researchers, however, presumably because of a need to foster the energy of the contact field among people who have been involved in the ITC endeavor for some time, both those living on Earth and those existing on the other side. Still, as in the case of little Ezra Braun, deceased loved ones of the experimenters or their friends are sometimes permitted to communicate to ease the hurt and loss of the survivors. In any event, a close emotional attachment that pre-existed on Earth apparently strengthens the contact field. The modern scientific community has not to date had incentive to explore the ITC phenomena in any meaningful way. Despite some vigorous and clearly validating tests by leading sound engineers in England involving ITC pioneer Konstantin Rodive's results that tapped spirit voices in the early 1970s. The limitations of the current scientific paradigm may be too great to be surmounted by simple curiosity, despite the receipt of even more profoundly anomalous, inexplicable transmissions via television, telephone, and personal computer in the decades since Rodive's time. Nevertheless, before his death in 1996, Dr. Willis Harman, the former Stanford engineer professor and president of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, IONS, in California, championed the work of Macy and other ITC researchers and wrote of it as a challenge to modern science. Ironically, perhaps naturally, a recent ITC contact with an angelic being indicated that Harman, having now made his transition, quote, intends to work closely with the spirit group who is trying to contact Mark Macy. Macy and his fellow INIT researchers are now in the planning stages of a collaborative effort to subject ITC to scientific scrutiny involving researchers from IONS and the Monroe Institute, both respected U.S. organizations known for their research in the frontier sciences. Will they, with the assistance of their former colleagues beyond the veil, be able to prove once and for all that human consciousness survives death? Time will tell. For the present, Macy regularly monitors his wide coverage array of multi-band radio receivers and works at educating as many people as possible about ITC through workshops, presentations, and publications. He believes that should he and others succeed in regularly stimulating clear images, voices, and text from the beyond, ITC could ultimately become a conduit of the love and wisdom from the highest levels of spirit, and thus help transform the world in a rapid and positive way. We hope so too. And that is the end of that article. Whew. I was fading. But now all we have is articles 39 and 40 to finish up on Sunday. The next one is about near-death experiences. The one after that is the case for reincarnation. And that'll be the end of the book. So, once again, remember, go out to Twitter, look me up, same name, Menace Gilgalad, all one word, and vote on that poll. Let me know which of those 4 books you're most interested in. Or, like I said before, make a comment and write something in if you would prefer. But anyway, yeah, that'll be it for tonight. I am not going to game. I'm just going to end this session. I will see who's around. We've got Zeuswood playing Resident Evil 4. Critical Role. They've got 17,000 people watching. They don't need me or you. Happy Jacks RPG, and they're playing a one-shot, I think. And Tofugo playing The Sims 4. I think I'm going to raid Happy Jacks. Why the hell not? If you'll stick around, I'll see if it's going to work. The last few times it's been dropping people off. So I'm not sure what's going on there. So let's try it. Happy Jack. See how many it says are actually going to go. And right now it's saying 1 viewer. I'm not going to take just 1 viewer. So I don't know what's going on. I don't know how many of you are actually still watching. Right now, Twitch says I only have 1 viewer, but if I go to my channel, it says... Oh, it says I only have 1. All right, I guess I only have 1 person watching. So, not enough to raid with. So I will just end it, and I'll see you in the next one.